This is the start of the how-to videos for the marriage rug. Everyone should have received your order. All of the marriage rugs have gone out. Some went out a bit late, some went out a bit early. My shipping time is a guesstimate depending on what's happening, how much work I need to do, how many orders come in at one time. Usually a lot of orders come in within 24 hours, so that causes a problem with me getting the orders out on the day that I say is going to be your shipping date. With this rug in particular, it took a lot of time to dye the wool. This was off-white wool. It was very much the color of the background. It took 2 sets of dye to get the colors. I dyed it once, and then I washed and dried it, and then I dyed it a second time. The other thing is I wanted different blankets, different textures to make the faded look, and that took quite a bit of time to do. So I'm going to go over just some points with this first video. Just points to remember and explain, and then I will get into the how-tos. First, your string that's in your kit is a bit longer than the regular string that I've included in my other kits, and that is because I found to do around the tongue without stopping and starting, it was very close to not having enough thread. So we all have different ways to blanket stitch. We have different lengths and different, different ways. So I added extra thread, and what we will do is we will check the thread on the first tongue because it is quite long, and then you can mark your thread, and you can only use the thread that you need. This is the first step. We do all of the tongues. The applique that I have done my applique with this thread. I found by using this thread, although it doesn't look like that, it was too thick to do an applique on the tongues. I wanted it smaller. This is the full-size thread doing the applique, but because there's so much applique in a tongue, so many numbers and dates, I found the thread was too thick. And this is probably the only problem that you will have with the rug. I took my thread apart just as you would embroidery floss. See if I can do that. It's not easy to do. I just and I do a short length, don't do a long piece, but I just keep going like this and taking it apart. And I've used the one strand for my embroidery. However, because the thread is taken apart, it's not as strong, and as you stitch through the wool over and over again, it's going to fray. So I've tried just about everything I could think of, and I finally ended up that I used a glue stick. I separated my threads into short lengths, one thread. These are it's 3 to a string, and I just went over it with the glue stick. I tried beeswax, it didn't work, and so that gave it a bit of strength. If you don't want to do that, I would suggest that you would do this part of your rug and the embroidery part with another type of thread that is very similar to this color. give that a try and see if it's a better fix for you. This is a bit tedious, and it doesn't really work that well. I had to do the glue. I found that it was breaking, but I wanted it all the same color. The tongues and the stars can be with this thread, and if you find it's too difficult to do by separating the threads, then find whatever choice of threads as close to this color, close to the color of your thread as possible. I would go one shade darker rather than one shade lighter. And so the first thing we're going to do is explain the center. Many of you had problems, you didn't know the what to put in the center. This is a marriage rug because this is my story, but it also can be a memory rug. Your name could be in the center with your dates and your initial, and memories in the tongues, important people, places, events in your life. So it could be, instead of a marriage rug, it could be a memory rug. The other thing is, many of you wanted just the center with the 3 tongues on each side. You could also put a date here. Instead of the stars, you could put some sort of applique writing there and have that as your name or a date that's important to you. That's not a very good star. The stars are not finished on the tongue before it's put in place. They are attached. So the first thing that you do is the blanket stitching. Also, I've given everyone a sample tongue to show my stitching. That is to give you some idea of how much they overlap. In my rug, one stitching overlaps another, and that gives you some idea of the layout. And I think I have gone over everything, and now I think we'll start with doing the blanket stitch on the tongues. The first step in doing the rug is to blanket stitch all of the tongues. They should be all blanket stitched like this, and once you have those done, then you start to set out your rug. There are probably, I think, 100 tongues in every kit, so that's a lot of stitching. I have given you a lot of thread. You will have extra left over. I don't want you being thousands of miles away and run out of thread. You do not stop and start your threads, so don't use small pieces. Always use a long piece. And as I've mentioned before, the thread is longer than what's usual in my kits. So you would pull a thread, just as you do with the other kits, and half it. And you would do this with your first piece because you are going to have quite a bit left over from every piece that you use. So for the first piece, I would measure the thread, and the easiest way to do that is to just half your thread. I do not knot the thread. I suppose you could. It really doesn't matter, but there are a lot of knots in the rug, a lot of places where you're going to have to knot your thread, so I just prefer not to do that with the tongues. And I just do a few back stitches. And that's the problem with long thread. It sometimes catches. And you will see this on the sample tongue that I've sent in the kit. This is not showing. This is always hidden once your rug is finished, so it really doesn't matter how neat it is. It's just to secure the thread. And then you can go along and do your blanket stitches. Now, the problem I have is I can't hold things in my hand and stitch. I need my two hands. So I've made a roll. It's just fabric and tied at both ends. It's just something that I can use as a something to hold the tongue, and I put 2 pins in. You certainly do not have to do it this way. However is comfortable for you, you do your stitching. The sample tongue has the width. Try to stay as close to that as possible. This part doesn't matter that much. The width between the stitches doesn't matter that much. Just do whatever's comfortable for you. But this part is the overlap in the rug, so try to have it as close to that as possible. And I just begin stitching. You see I need my 2 hands. And yes, I have stitched the tongue to this roll. That has happened. But for me it's much easier. And so I will continue on and finish this stitching. So I have come to the last few stitches. And then I bring my needle in. Oh, and you see, I did catch it. But it's an open weave, so I cut the fabric rather than cutting there. I didn't cut the thread. And that's happened more than once. So I just bring my thread up and do a few back stitches again. You're actually going to stitch over this part of the rug with running stitches, just the small stitches. You can also use a sewing machine if you wanted to. I would never do that, but that's your choice. This is where they are attached to the cotton base, so there. So now I have this much thread left over from doing a tongue, which is quite a bit. And this was the piece of thread that I had halved and used and threaded my needle. So this is just extra thread. I will measure it. And let's say I'll halve that. I have this much left over from a tongue, or maybe even a little bit less. You can judge how much you need to maneuver your needle. use that much. This was the extra piece from the 2 pieces that I cut, so this is the amount that I would need to comfortably do the blanket stitch. I then use this as my measurement rather than having the thread. So I would pull another length. I would keep this as my measurement. I wouldn't stitch this. This is my measurement. So I would use this to cut my thread instead of doing it in half. And it is there. And let's see how much I would have left over. So I have quite a bit left over, and this is what you would use to, you could use this for your applique, or you could use it to make your stars, but you do have lots of thread, so really you can just keep this for a future project. So we have our first tongue stitched, 99 more to go, and that's the first step. And once we have the tongues stitched around, then we start with the layout, and that will be the next video.